Tommy Harrison sat on the edge of his bed at 11:47 p.m., staring at the digital clock as if he could will it to stop moving forward. The red numbers seemed to mock him, counting down to an inevitable confrontation he'd been dreading all day. He tried everything. 3 energy drinks, 4 cups of coffee, and enough caffeine pills to make his hands shake like autumn leaves. His radio blasted heavy metal at a volume that would normally have his father pounding on the door, but Frank Harrison had been working late shifts all week, leaving Tommy alone with his terror. The room felt different tonight, charged with the kind of electric tension that preceded violent storms. His trophies gleamed in the lamplight, each one a testament to victories that now seemed hollow and meaningless. The championship ring on his dresser caught the light and threw it back in fractured patterns that hurt to look at directly. Tommy's reflection in the bedroom mirror looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, with the distinctive pallor of someone who'd been existing on adrenaline and fear for too long. His Letterman jacket hung on the closet door like the shed skin of his former self, the boy who'd believed that athletic prowess could shield him from anything the world threw at him. But that boy had never been hunted by something that lived in dreams. The conversation with his friends that afternoon had offered little comfort. They'd huddled together in the library like refugees from some invisible war, sharing increasingly desperate strategies that all sounded like the delusions of people who'd already lost their minds. "Maybe we could take turns staying awake," Sarah had suggested, but her voice carried no conviction. They all knew that exhaustion would claim them eventually, no matter how much chemical assistance they enlisted. "What about sleeping pills?" Lisa had offered weakly. "Something to knock us out so deep we don't dream?" But Mark had shaken his head, his druggies' knowledge more extensive than any of them wanted to acknowledge. "REM rebound," he'd said. "Miss it one night, and the next night the dreams come back twice as intense." They were tracked, and they all knew it. The thing that hunted them had infinite patience and unlimited access to the one place where everyone was vulnerable. It was just a matter of time before it decided to escalate from psychological torture to something more permanent. Tommy looked at the clock again, 11:52 p.m. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake Morrison. "You coming to practice tomorrow? Coach is pissed about your performance this week." Tommy stared at the message, trying to remember what normal life had felt like just a week ago. The idea of worrying about football practice seemed absurd now, like obsessing over homework while your house burned down around you. He turned the phone off without responding. The house creaked and settled around him, familiar sounds that had once been comforting but now seemed ominous. Every noise could be his father coming home early, ready to deliver another lecture about dedication and mental toughness. Frank Harrison had no patience for weakness, and the dark circles under Tommy's eyes definitely qualified as weakness in his book. "Champions don't make excuses," his father's voice echoed in his memory. "They find a way to win, no matter what." But how do you win against something that exists in your dreams? How do you tackle an opponent made of nightmare and malice? Tommy's eyes burned with fatigue, but every time he felt himself starting to nod off, he forced himself back to alertness. He'd taken to slapping himself when drowsiness crept in, leaving his cheeks red and stinging. The physical pain was a small price to pay for staying conscious. The clock read 12:03 a.m. He got up and walked to the window, peering out at the empty street bathed in sickly yellow streetlight. Springwood looked peaceful from up here, suburban tranquility preserved in amber, like a postcard from a better time. But Tommy could feel the wrongness underneath, the sense that something ancient was stirring beneath the facade of normalcy. A movement in the shadows across the street caught his attention. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw a tall, thin figure standing beneath the old oak tree, watching his house with patient intensity. But when he blinked and looked again, there was nothing there except wind-stirred branches casting shifting patterns on the sidewalk. His heart hammered against his ribs anyway. Tommy returned to his bed and picked up the baseball bat he'd retrieved from the garage earlier. The aluminum felt solid and reassuring in his hands, a tangible weapon against intangible threats. He'd placed it within easy reach, though some part of his mind whispered that physical weapons would be useless against an enemy that existed in dreams. The clock showed 12:17 a.m. His eyelids felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. The caffeine that had sustained him earlier was wearing off, leaving behind a crash that made his entire body ache with exhaustion. His vision blurred at the edges, and he had to blink repeatedly to bring the room back into focus. Tommy stood up and began doing jumping jacks, forcing his body into motion to combat the overwhelming urge to sleep. The exercise felt mechanical and desperate, like a ritual performed to ward off evil spirits. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning, and his heart rate spiked to uncomfortable levels. But it was working. The physical activity drove back the drowsiness, at least temporarily. He kept it up for 10 minutes before his legs gave out and he collapsed back onto the bed, gasping for air. The exertion had bought him some time, but he could feel his body systems beginning to shut down despite his will to remain conscious. 12:31 a.m. Tommy's phone rang, the sudden sound making him jump so violently that he nearly fell off the bed. The caller ID showed his father's number, and for a moment Tommy considered not answering. Frank Harrison drunk at 12:30 a.m. was never a pleasant experience. "Hello?" Tommy's voice came out as a croak. "Tommy? You sound terrible. Are you sick?" His father's voice was clearer than expected, more concerned than angry. It caught Tommy off guard. "Just tired, Dad. Having trouble sleeping." "Well, get some rest. Big game this Friday, and Coach Peterson called me today. Said you've been distracted at practice." I told him my son doesn't get distracted, he gets focused. "Don't make me a liar, boy." The familiar pressure settled on Tommy's shoulders like a lead blanket. Even now, even in the middle of his supernatural crisis, his father's expectations remained the primary force shaping his reality. "I won't, Dad. I'll be ready." "Damn right you will." Harrison men don't quit, and they don't make excuses. Whatever's bothering you, you figure it out and get past it. Champions find a way. The line went dead, leaving Tommy alone with his father's words echoing in the silence. Champions find a way. But what way was there to find when your opponent existed in a realm where normal rules didn't apply? 12:47 a.m. The exhaustion was winning. Tommy could feel his consciousness beginning to fray at the edges, reality blurring into the soft focus that preceded sleep. His head nodded forward, jerking back up as he caught himself drifting off. He tried slapping himself again, but the pain barely registered now. His nervous system was too depleted to respond properly to stimuli. The coffee and energy drinks had run their course, leaving behind a hollow, shaky feeling that made his bones ache. The room seemed to darken around him, though the lamps burned as brightly as before. Shadows gathered in the corners, taking on weight and substance that shouldn't have been possible. The familiar space of his bedroom began to feel foreign, as if he were seeing it through someone else's eyes. Tommy's breathing slowed despite his efforts to maintain alertness. His pulse, which had been racing for hours, began to settle into the deeper rhythms that preceded sleep. The baseball bat slipped from his loosening grip and clattered to the floor with a sound that seemed to come from very far away. 1:03 a.m. His eyes closed for just a moment, or at least, that's what he told himself. Just a brief rest, a few seconds of darkness to reset his system before resuming his vigil. He'd done it before throughout the night, micro-sleeps that lasted only heartbeats before his survival instincts yanked him back to consciousness. But this time was different. This time, when Tommy opened his eyes, he was no longer in his bedroom. He stood at the 50-yard line of the Springwood High football field, but it was the field from his nightmares, organic and wrong, pulsing with its own diseased life beneath a sky that wasn't quite black, wasn't quite anything. The grass felt spongy under his cleats, yielding in ways that suggested it was more flesh than plant matter. Tommy looked down and realized he was wearing his full uniform, pristine white with the number 12 gleaming on his chest and back. He had no memory of getting dressed, no recollection of how he'd gotten to the field. One moment he'd been fighting sleep in his bedroom, The next he was here in this place that existed somewhere between dreams and nightmares. The silence was absolute and oppressive, pressing against his eardrums like deep water. No crowd noise, no wind, no distant sounds of civilization, just the wet, rhythmic breathing of the field beneath his feet. Each pulse sent tremors up through his legs, as if he were standing on the chest of some massive, sleeping beast. The goalposts loomed impossibly tall against the alien sky, their yellow paint gleaming with an oily sheen that hurt to look at directly. The yard markers stretched into the distance, but their numbers seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. 10 yards became 15, then 20, then symbols that weren't numbers at all but something older and more disturbing. Tommy tried to run, muscle memory taking over when conscious thought failed, but each step sent him sinking slightly deeper into the yielding surface. The grass, if it was grass, wrapped around his cleats with grasping, finger-like tendrils that tugged at his feet with increasing strength. He could feel eyes watching him from the empty stands, though when he looked directly at the bleachers, they appeared deserted. But peripheral vision caught glimpses of movement, suggestions of shapes that shouldn't exist applauding with sounds like breaking bones. Tommy Harrison, ladies and gentlemen. The voice boomed across the field with the practiced enthusiasm of a stadium announcer, though there were no speakers visible, no press box, no obvious source for the sound. It seemed to rise from the field itself, from the hungry grass that pulsed with each syllable. Tommy spun around, trying to locate the voice, but it came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off surfaces that didn't exist and bouncing back from a sky that swallowed sound like a black hole. Number 12, quarterback for the Springwood Eagles. Let's hear it for tonight's star player. The applause that followed was wrong in every conceivable way. Too loud, too synchronized, too much like the sound of meat being torn from bone. Tommy covered his ears, but the sound came from inside his head now, reverberating through his skull until his teeth ached. Now folks, tonight's game is a special one, the announcer continued with gleeful malice. Winner takes all, loser gets, well, let's just say the losing team won't be playing next season. A figure began to emerge from the far end zone, walking with casual confidence across the field that had begun to grab at Tommy's feet with increasing aggression. At first, it was just a dark shape against the wrongness of the landscape, but as it drew closer, details became horrifyingly clear. The burned face was even worse in person than it had been in previous glimpses, melted flesh pulled tight over exposed bone, eyes that burned with malevolence, and a grin that split the ruined features from ear to ear. It wore a red and green striped sweater that had been charred and tattered by flames, hanging loose on a frame that seemed both impossibly tall and unnaturally thin. Well, the thing said. If it isn't Daddy's little quarterback. Ready for the game of your life, superstar. Tommy tried to back away, but the field had him now. His feet had sunk up to the ankles in the grasping grass, and with each movement, he sank deeper. The plant matter, or whatever it actually was, pulsed around his legs with obscene hunger. What's the matter, golden boy? The creature asked with mock concern. Choking under pressure already? That's not very champion-like, is it? The thing began to circle him like a predator, moving with fluid grace while Tommy remained trapped in the field's grasp. Those burning eyes never left his face, drinking in his terror with obvious satisfaction. You know, I've been watching you, Tommy. Studying your technique. Very impressive, all those touchdowns, all those victories. But you know what I found most interesting? The creature leaned closer, and Tommy could smell charred flesh and old blood, could see his own terrified reflection multiplied in those flame-filled sockets. How you crumble when Daddy gets angry. How you shake when he raises his voice. How you take it all out on that practice dummy in your garage, pretending it's him while you beat the shit out of it. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. No one knew about that, about the late-night sessions in the garage where he'd unleash his rage and frustration on the tackling dummy, imagining it was his father's face he was hitting. Oh yes, the creature continued, savoring Tommy's shock. I know all about Frank Harrison and his special training methods. The belt, the fists, the constant disappointment in his voice. The burned thing began to laugh, a sound like children screaming in a distant playground. "Tell me, Tommy, does Daddy know his precious champion is afraid of him?" "Shut up," Tommy whispered, but his voice carried no strength, no conviction. "Or better yet," the creature said, flexing those razor fingers with obvious anticipation, "does Daddy know that sometimes you wish he was dead? That you lie in bed at night imagining what it would be like if he just disappeared?" The field pulsed beneath Tommy like a massive heart, and he realized with growing horror that he'd sunk up to his knees now. The grass, or whatever it was, had begun to work its way under his uniform, tickling against his skin with movements that felt disturbingly like tiny tongues. "Time for the final play, superstar," the creature announced, raising the razor-fingered glove. "And don't worry about disappointing Daddy this time. Where you're going, his opinion won't matter anymore." The thing that had once been human smiled wider, its sharpened teeth gleaming in the impossible light of this nightmare realm. "Welcome to my world, Tommy. Let's see how champions play when the roles don't apply." Tommy struggled against the field's grip, his quarterback instinct screaming at him to escape the pocket, to scramble away from the rush. But this wasn't football anymore. This was something far older and more primal, a game where the only role was survival. "Let me go," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "This isn't real. This is just a dream." The creature threw back its burned head and laughed with genuine delight, the sound echoing off invisible walls and bouncing back from the star-swallowing sky. "Oh, Tommy, Tommy, Tommy," it said, shaking its head in mock sympathy. "Still trying to quarterback your way out of this? Still looking for the easy pass, the safe play? But there's no safe play here, golden boy. There's no timeout, no substitution, no daddy on the sideline calling the shots." The field pulsed again, more violently this time, and Tommy sank another few inches. The organic surface had reached his thighs now, and he could feel something moving beneath the grass, things with too many teeth, waiting for their turn to feed. "You know what your problem is, superstar?" the creature asked, beginning to pace around Tommy's trapped form with predatory grace. "You've never learned to lose. Never had to face real adversity. Always had Daddy there to push you, to make sure you stayed on top." The burned thing paused directly in front of Tommy, those flame-filled sockets boring into his soul. "But what happens when Daddy can't help you? What happens when all that training, all that pressure, all those championships don't mean shit?" Tommy tried to throw a punch, his athlete's instincts demanding action even in the face of impossibility. But his arm moved as if through thick honey, the dream logic of this place making his muscles heavy and unresponsive. The creature caught his fist effortlessly in its unmarked hand, the skin cold and waxy like a corpse left too long in water. "Nice try, quarterback," it said with amusement. "But you're playing in my stadium now, and I never lose the home field advantage." With casual strength, the thing forced Tommy's arm back, bending it at angles that made bones creak and ligaments scream in protest. Tommy cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the hungry silence of this place. "Tell you what," the creature said, releasing Tommy's arm and stepping back with theatrical flair. "Let's make this interesting. How about a little wager? You win, you wake up safe in your cozy little bed. You lose." The razor-fingered glove flexed, metal scraping against metal with sounds like fingernails on chalkboards. "Well, let's just say Daddy will have to find himself a new quarterback." Tommy felt the field give another lurch beneath him, pulling him deeper into its organic embrace. He was waist-deep now, trapped in what felt increasingly like the digestive system of some massive, patient beast. "What kind of game?" Tommy asked, his competitive nature overriding his terror despite the insanity of the situation. The creature's grin widened impossibly, splitting its burned face nearly in half. "My favorite kind," it said. "A game of truth. I ask questions, you answer honestly. Lie to me, and you sink faster. Tell the truth." The thing paused, savoring the moment. "And you still sink, just slower. But hey, at least you'll die with a clear conscience." Before Tommy could protest the obvious rigging of this contest, the creature snapped its fingers. The sound was like breaking bones, and suddenly the field around them began to transform. The grass became teeth, millions of tiny, needle-sharp teeth that gnashed and bit at Tommy's trapped body. The ground beneath pulsed more rapidly now, a digestive rhythm that spoke of appetite and patience and the certainty of eventual consumption. Question 1, the thing announced with game show enthusiasm. Do you love your father? Tommy's mouth opened to give the automatic response. Of course he loved his father, that's what good sons were supposed to say. But something about this place, something about those burning eyes watching him with ancient knowledge, made lies impossible. Tommy started, then stopped. I hate him. I hate him so much it makes me sick. The words came out like poison being drained from an infected wound, and Tommy felt simultaneously relieved and horrified to have spoken them aloud. The creature clapped its hands with delight, the razor blades creating a sound like breaking glass. Excellent. Honesty. I like it. It leaned closer, breathing the stench of charred flesh directly into Tommy's face. Tell me more about that hate, golden boy. What would you do to Daddy if you were big enough, strong enough, brave enough? Tommy tried to resist, but the words poured out of him as if the field itself was squeezing them from his body like juice from a grape. I'd kill him, Tommy whispered, the admission tearing something loose inside his chest. I'd beat him to death with his own belt. I'd make him crawl and beg and hurt the way he's made me hurt. Fantastic, the creature exclaimed. No wonder you're such a fierce competitor, all that daddy-inspired fury has to go somewhere. The seal gave another hungry lurch, pulling Tommy deeper. He was chest deep now, the organic matter pressing against his ribs like a slowly tightening fist. The teeth beneath the surface had begun to work in earnest, tiny pinpricks of pain that promised much worse to come. Question 2, the thing continued, its voice taking on the cadence of a television host. What's your greatest fear, Tommy? And don't give me some bullshit about losing the big game or disappointing the team. Tommy wanted to lie, wanted to deflect with some socially acceptable answer about failure or injury. But the truth came pouring out anyway, dragged from the deepest, most secret corners of his soul. I'm afraid I'm weak, he gasped, the field now pressing against his lungs and making speech difficult. I'm afraid that underneath all the muscle and the trophies and the championships, I'm just a scared little boy who'll never be good enough for anyone. The creature's laughter was like music played on broken instruments. Oh, Tommy, it said with mock sympathy. Don't you understand? You are weak. All that strength, all that training, all that competitive fire, and you still can't stand up to one middle-aged drunk. The words hit Tommy like physical blows, each one confirming fears he'd carried his entire life. But here's the beautiful part, the creature continued, beginning to circle him again. You know what you are now? You're Daddy's little victim, about to become my little plaything. From one bully to another, passed along like a party favor. The field around Tommy's chest began to transform, the organic surface rippling like disturbed water. What had seemed like grass now revealed its true nature, thousands upon thousands of tiny mouths, each one lined with needle-sharp teeth that opened and closed in synchronization. The sound they made was like a chorus of whispers, all speaking his name at once. Tommy. 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 His uniform began to dissolve where the mouths touched it, the fabric unraveling as if it were made of sugar in acid rain. The white jersey with his proud number 12 peeled away in strips, leaving his skin exposed to the hungry surface below. The tiny mouths latched onto him, not tearing or ripping but methodically working their way through layers of flesh with the patience of erosion. Tommy could feel every individual bite, thousands of pinpricks. This is what consumption really feels like, golden boy, the creature said, its voice now coming from the mouths themselves, a symphony of razored syllables. Tommy tried to scream, but the sound came out as a wet gurgle. The field had reached his throat now, and he could feel the tiny mouths working their way into his esophagus, his lungs, making speech impossible. But the worst part was that he could feel everything with clarity. The dream logic of this place wouldn't let him pass out, wouldn't grant him the mercy of shock or unconsciousness. He remained utterly aware as his body was processed, digested while still alive, broken down into component parts by an intelligence that found genuine pleasure in his suffering. "You want to know the really fun part?" the creature asked, leaning down so its burned face was inches from Tommy's. "Your daddy's belt never hurt like this, did it? All those years of toughening up, all that pain he gave you to make you strong, it was nothing compared to real agony." The field pulsed, and Tommy felt his ribcage begin to separate, the bones spreading apart like opening fingers. Through the gaps, he could see his own organs, heart, lungs, liver, all perfectly intact and functioning, beating and breathing and processing while surrounded by the digestive juices of this nightmare realm. "Look at that," the thing said with scientific fascination. "Still pumping away. Still trying to keep you alive while everything else gets recycled. The human body is such a stubborn machine." Tommy's vision began to fragment as the tiny moths worked their way into his skull, but instead of bringing darkness, the intrusion brought impossible sight. He could see himself from every angle, from inside and out, from above and below, as if he were being observed by 1,000 hungry eyes. He watched his own heart continue its desperate rhythm even as the muscle fibers began to unravel. He saw his lungs expand and contract in increasingly futile attempts to process air that was no longer air but some corrosive substance that burned like liquid fire. The creature's laughter echoed not just from outside but from within Tommy's own dissolving brain, as if the sound had taken up residence in his neural pathways and was rewiring his capacity for experience. "Time for the final play, quarterback," the thing announced. He could feel his consciousness being pulled apart, stretched and twisted until it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Part of him remained trapped in the digestive field, experiencing the slow dissolution of his physical form. Part of him floated above, watching with detached horror as his body was consumed. And part of him was already somewhere else entirely, a dark realm where the creature rolled absolutely. The thing whispered directly into what remained of Tommy's mind. "Don't worry, the fun's just beginning." The field completed its work with the efficiency of a factory assembly line, processing every molecule of Tommy Harrison. In the stands of this impossible stadium, something that might once have been other victims applauded with the sound of breaking bones and tearing flesh. Back in the real world, Frank Harrison found his son's body the next morning when Tommy failed to appear for their usual dawn workout. The boy was lying peacefully in his bed, covers pulled up to his chin, looking for all the world like he was simply sleeping deeply. The coroner would later determine that Tommy had died of cardiac arrest sometime between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m. No obvious cause, no sign of struggle, no indication of foul play. Just a healthy 17-year-old athlete whose heart had simply stopped beating. The only unusual detail was Tommy's expression, a look of profound terror frozen on his face, as if he'd seen something in his final moments that no living person was meant to witness. Frank Harrison stood over his son's body and wondered why he felt so empty, so bereft of the grief he knew he should be experiencing. Later, much later, he would realize that what he was mourning wasn't his son but his own dreams of glory, his own vision of what Tommy was supposed to become.